If you're a bard or a psychic, maybe you're a sorcerer, a witch, a summoner, even a thaumaturge who kind of pulls from the occult spell list, then occultism, it might just be a skill that you need in order to help you with knowledge based activities in the game. My name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, occultism is an intelligence based skill, and what occultism does, it kind of gives you a great deal of information about ancient philosophies, esoteric lore, obscure mysticism, and supernatural creatures like aberrations, spirits, oozes, things of that sort. If you do have most of your spells from the occult magical tradition, then occultism is going to be the skill that you are going to need in order to do a few things with it. But once again, to kind of go over what those magical traditions are, there is arcane, divine, occult, and primal. Arcane goes to arcana, divine goes to religion, occult goes to occultism, of course, and primal goes to nature. Let's go ahead and start talking about some of the actions that you can do with occultism. So, recall knowledge is a single action that you can do. It requires the concentration and the secret trait. So, the GM is going to be rolling a secret check for you. You will not know the result at most tables. What you are trying to do is you are trying to attempt a skill check to try to remember a bit of knowledge regarding to a topic. And for occultism, it is generally going to be ancient mysteries, obscure philosophies, creatures of occult significance like aberration spirits and oozes, and the positive energy, negative energy, shadow, astral, and ethereal planes. The GM will generally determine the DC for such checks and which skills you can check, but for any of those things that we previously mentioned, you will generally be rolling on your occultism. It does have the normal success conditions on a critical success. You recall the knowledge accurately and you will gain some additional information or maybe context for the information that you already got. On a success, you do recall the knowledge accurately or gain a clue about your current situation, but generally speaking, only that. You're not going to get anything additional. On a failure, you just don't recall anything. And like with most knowledge based actions that you try to do, on a critical failure, you remember something, but it's probably wrong. Actually, let's get rid of that probably and say it's going to be wrong. And you have an erroneous or misleading clue. Let's go ahead and move on to some of our trained actions. Our first trained action we're going to talk about is Decipher writing. It is an exploration, so it doesn't necessarily have an action cost, but it does have the concentrate, exploration, and secret trait. So what you're trying to do is you are trying to decipher complicated writing or literature on, in this particular case, some type of occult thing. It usually takes about a minute per page, but it may take longer if it's coded, if it is maybe some really advanced research notes, or if it is hard to read. It could be an hour per page for trying to decipher or decrypting. The text must be in a language that you can read, though the GM might allow you to try to decipher writing in another language if you check society instead, as opposed to doing occultism. The difficulty class is going to be determined by the GM, and it's basically going to be based on what the information is, how complicated it is, but also whether it is encrypted, like has a cipher, or if it is of some subject that requires background knowledge, like, once again, advanced research notes. The GM could have you roll once for the entire thing you're trying to decipher. It is if it is small or something not that complicated, or you might be checking for each section or page of text. It just kind of depends. Now, it does have the normal success conditions that these type of things do, which is on a critical success, you understand the true meaning of the text. On a success, you understand the true meaning of the text. But if it was a coded document of some sort, then you won't know necessarily the true meaning or word for word, but you will have a general idea of what's in it and know the information, just not know it in the exact wording that it was originally written in. On a failure, you can't understand the text and you take a -2 circumstance penalty to any further checks that you try to do against it. And on a critical failure, just like with most knowledge-based things, you believe that you deciphered it perfectly, you're just wrong. And that is the information you have with it. Now, there are some tasks that they give you a sample for based on your proficiency level. If you're trained, you're pretty much just doing some entry level philosophy or something along those lines. Expert, then you can do some complex coding or a cipher of some sort. And if you are a master, then you could do a spy master's code or some advanced research notes. But you would need to have these training levels in order to really have a shot at deciphering writing from anything in that particular category. Let's go ahead and move on to our next. Identify magic is something else you can do if you are trained in occultism, and it does have the concentrate, exploration, and secret trait, which means that once again, the GM is going to roll for you, and you might not know exactly how well you rolled at most tables at the very least. But what it is you are trying to identify a certain magic. Once you discover that an item, location, or ongoing effect is magical, then you can spend 10 minutes to try to identify the particulars of its magic. If your attempt is interrupted, you must start over. That's kind of what the concentrate trait does for you. You will have to start all over and do another fresh 10 minutes. The GM is going to set the DC for your check, and cursed or some esoteric or really obscure subjects usually have a much higher DC or might even be impossible to identify using just identify magic. But heightening a spell does not increase the DC to identify it. It does have the normal success conditions. On a critical success, you learn all the attributes of the magic, including its name or whatever its effect is, what it does, any means of activating it for an item or some type of location, and whether it is cursed. On a success for an item or location, you get a general sense of what it will do as well as how to activate it. For an ongoing effect, maybe like a spell with a duration, you learn the effect's name and what it does. You can't try to do another identify magic in order to get a critical success. Once you've reached success, that is how good you are going to get as far as trying to identify that particular magic. On a failure, you fail to identify the magic and you can't try again for a full day. And on a critical failure, just like most of these knowledge-based things, you misidentify the magic or potentially something even worse based on GM's choice. We're going to go ahead and move on to our last trained action. Our last trained action is learn a spell. It has the concentrate and exploration trait, but it does not have the secret trait. You'll be rolling it yourself. But it does have a requirement. And the requirement is that you have a spell casting class feature, and the spell you want to learn is on your magical tradition spell list. So in this case, since you're doing occultism, it needs to be on the occult spell list. You are trying to gain access to a new spell of your tradition from someone who knows that spell or a written text that has that spell on it, like a spell book or scroll. If you know multiple traditions of magic, then you can attempt to learn a spell from multiple traditions, whichever ones you have. However, you have to use that check. If you were trying to learn an arcane spell, you wouldn't use occultism, you would use arcana. In order to learn the spell, you must do these things. You must spend an hour per level of the spell with the person who's trying to teach you or with the magical text that you're trying to read it from. You must have basically the cost or the materials needed that are indicated on this table, and I'll go ahead and pop it up here. And you must attempt a skill check determined by the GM based on the DC on this same table. However, I will say uncommon or rare spells can have higher DCs, and that is going to be something that the GM is going to have to decide. If you have a spell book, once you learn a spell, it lets you add that spell to your spell book. If you prepare spells from a list, then it's just going to be added to your list. And if you have a spell repertoire, then you can select it when you add or swap spells. On a critical success, you expend half the materials that you needed to pay, and you learn the spell. So for example, on a second level spell, you needed 6 gold. Well, you're only going to spend 3 gold, and you get to keep that extra 3 gold. On a success, you expend all the materials you needed to learn that spell, and you learn the spell. On a failure, you fail to learn the spell, but you can try again at your next level. You do not expend the materials, so if you had that 6 gold for second level spell, you still have that 6 gold for second level spell. On a critical failure, it's the same as a failure. In other words, you do fail, however, you expend half of what you needed in order to try to learn that spell. So for that second level, you would basically lose 3 gold while still not knowing the spell. Now, I hope you enjoyed this guide on occultism. It is a really good knowledge-based skill. especially if you need to know about ancient philosophies, the supernatural, some type of mysteries or odd lore. But this is one of those knowledge based skills that really can help you and your party in certain situations when you're trying to figure out what to do next. I hope you liked the video. And if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.